Thank you to Linda Craig, to Sherry, and to all of the League of Women Voters. I'm so proud to be a member of this organization and on the board of the West Contra Costa County League, and as well as the Air Quality Commission in El Cerrito. And what I'd like to do today is take us in a slightly different direction in terms of just how we've been talking about this. I'd like you to meet some of the frontline communities who are not only being impacted by climate change, and we know that vulnerable communities are the first and the hardest hit in any extreme weather events or in the gradual processes of climate change. So I want to kind of take you to the front lines of what is happening and some of the successes that are going on as vulnerable communities are actually offering leadership in this movement, not just being impacted, but actually leading many of the innovations that are going on. So part of what I would like to also bring forward is this idea that we're all in this together, that we're really facing a very important moment of climate impacts on not only on vulnerable communities, but that's really all of us. We are a vulnerable community, facing the possibility of really undermining the biological support system of the planet. And so it's not just climate, we're really looking at how is the environmental, the economic, and the growing social inequity causing what we call a triple threat, which is also a triple opportunity. So I'm here to share some of the hope that we feel coming out of vulnerable communities. Some of this work is documented in our new publication, Climate Justice, Frontline Stories from Groundbreaking Coalitions in California. This work I do at Breakthrough Communities as part of a team. Carl Anthony, many of you know, is a living legend in the Bay Area and internationally in the environmental justice movement, and he's hard at work at his new book, The Earth, the City, and the Hidden Narrative of Race. I'd like to share a little bit of the context of how the world looks to vulnerable communities, and also 5 strategies that we're inventing to face the kind of life-threatening positions, because our vulnerable communities are the canaries in the mine. They're the ones who feel it first, feel it hardest, and they are actually in a position to give warning signs to all of us. So here we are on this planet Earth, and what time is it? We're really reevaluating how our budgets are impacting our investments internationally and locally, and how they also compromise our ability to respond, not only to major weather events, but also to the gradual processes that are going on. We are, in our ecological footprint, exceeding our carrying capacity, and we are facing a number of droughts, fires, other things that Jenny brought up to us. And a way that community groups are responding involves what we have come to call the compass, ways of responding when you have something about to hit you, whether it's living in Cancer Alley in the half-mile surrounding Chevron, or you've just been impacted by a weather event like in Katrina. How do you go about responding to that? Also, when you're facing day-to-day life threats, how do you then take on something like climate that sounds so far away? So in vulnerable communities that we work with and that we're a part of, the face of climate change isn't a polar bear on an ice cap, even though that is also going on. The community groups that we work with see that children who are endangered in our inner cities are in fact the face of climate change, and their asthma rates going up, as Jenny told us about, are very much connected. And so we're working on sort of expressing and communicating with each other in a way that holds both of these. How do we hold the life support system and major species together with our own vulnerable communities? In many communities, the first way that we stand up is by saying no. There's something that's happening. It could be what we call spatial apartheid, places where we are separated by divides, such as bridges or highways that come through the center of our communities, and actually divide opportunity as well as geography. So here, I don't know if you can see these signs, and I'm not saying that this is sort of 101 North going towards Marin and Richmond, but for some of our communities, they might consider life like that, that there's sort of a choice that people want green space, and they're being left with the toxics and the burdens of open space and of a different kind of quality of life. So we're all in it together. It's so amazing that we're here for this interregional gathering, because we see that unless we learn to work together as regions, we're not going to reach the scale of solutions that we need. So as we look at sprawl and the flows of suburbanization of poverty that's going on, we see that all of us are now in this together, so that the fire over Chevron affected everyone in the Bay Area, but of course it impacted communities immediately around that the hardest. And how community groups are rising up is saying no. So that's the second stage of change here. The Our Power national convening made national news when groups throughout the United States came into Richmond. How many people here knew about the Our Power conference that happened here last summer? This is an extraordinary event where vulnerable communities from Detroit, from New Orleans, from various Chicago, people who had experienced sort of deaths in the heat rise effects there, came together and said, how do we begin imagining and inventing a renewable and post-petroleum future? We're not dreaming big enough, and we're settling for reacting to rather than inventing a future. But saying no is part of it, saying no to pollution and energy that involves increasing disparities and impacts on low income and people of color. One of the other ways that community groups are taking initiative is in Richmond right now, there's something called the Bucket Brigade, where middle school and high school youth are actually learning how to make these air gathering buckets that can be submissible in court, taking air samples so that when Chevron says no, we didn't have pollution, they have their air sample and can say, yes, here's what it was. And they know how to assemble these. They also can give you a toxic tour of Richmond. So they're becoming stronger and informed by education and also by tools. Thank you. The next stage is getting grounded. We find that sometimes it's information about what are some of the processes where we can get involved. We find sometimes that if we're not at the table where decisions are being made about our communities, then we're on the menu. So this is so what we have learned over this SB 375 process, where the Bay Area and California led the country, is that we learned that if we're going to create a place where community groups are actually giving input to these sustainable community strategies, we have to learn to work together. So we invented a process called the 6 Wins, and this was very exciting, where groups that in health, as Jenny reported on, that are working on areas of jobs, of affordable housing, of health, economic opportunity, and building community power all came together, and we won. We actually had made national news by submitting an equity, environment, and jobs scenario that was included, and John Joya, whom we heard from earlier, was the person who put forward the proposal to include the sustainable community strategy equity scenario. And this amazed all of us, because what we found is that by inventing something where communities were driving the regional planning process and submitting our own proposal and not just kind of picking up the crumbs or reacting afterwards, that actually our proposal outperformed ABAG and MTCs. And this made national news again. So here we were with, in this very room, actually, with our equity scenario signs, meeting month after month, week after week, gathering ourselves, inviting in youth who learned about climate change and learned to speak up for their neighborhoods. We also practiced kind of telling our stories and learning about sort of the history of our movements and how they intersected over time. We also learned how to do education and advocacy days, very much in the spirit of League of Women Voters, actually. We would do one-on-ones with elected officials and on all sides of the aisle and listen to their proposals and also share community input. And on these days, this one in particular, we met with 57 board members and in one day went to 9 counties. We met in the morning, very disciplined like League of Women Voters, went out in cross-sector, cross-regional teams, cross-racial teams, and then came back at the end of the day and said, you know, what did we learn and how does this make us smarter and more effective going forward? Amy Worth, who was mayor of Orinda and at that time and chair of MTC, said it was the best legislative visit she had ever had. And the final stage is saying yes. It's not enough community groups are learning to say no and what we're against. We're actually inventing and becoming leaders where we learn to say yes and create a bigger tent where we're linking with groups like Timothy Burrows that we're about to hear from with the City of Berkeley. We're learning to work with MTC and ABAG, and we're learning to work across neighborhoods that have sometimes been at war with one another or at each other's throats for various reasons that are important and historical. And we're learning how to redesign new ways of living, closer to transit, as Stuart talked about. We're learning how to invest in our future. I think this is Measure BB, actually, that passed, a free eco-bus pass for youth, where we send a strong message to youth saying, you don't have to choose between eating and riding to school. You can get to the schools that are good for you by having a free bus pass. We're learning that community choice aggregation is an option for our communities. And we're learning that we can link these environmental vulnerabilities to economic recovery. And I think my time is about up, but I just wanted to say the final point is that in Senate Bill 535, which is on cap and trade, taxing polluters, community groups are learning to come together who are in these targeted regions. And we have fought to have 25% of the cap and trade go to vulnerable communities. And 10% be invested directly in those communities. And so I'm excited that, to share with you a strategy that we've invented from the ground up. It's something that is involving all parts of the region, the interconnection of these various issues. And what we're also learning, and this is taken from our most recent book with a foreword by Desmond Tutu, that no amount of legislation is going to be enough, that there's actually a spirit of interconnectedness. Desmond Tutu calls it Ubuntu, a spirit of seeing that we are all in this together, just like our region is gathered here together with League of Women Voters, that our most vulnerable communities are actually our assets and have amazing innovation and leadership to bring. And that in fact this triple threat that we have is part of a triple opportunity, and they're ready and wanting to partner with us. So let's, as a challenge to League of Women Voters, let's think about how our own organization can itself reflect the communities that we are hoping to serve, have a representation of race and class, because when these groups are part of the decision making, then they're not on the menu, and we are actually contributing enormous solutions that are needed in order for the whole region and for the whole community to thrive. Thank you.